Hello, everyone. This is Josh Burson, and we're now in the ninth or 10th week of the pandemic. And a lot of you are in situations where many of your employees, locations, plants, offices are starting to open, and you're starting to send people back to work. And of course, we're filled with information and ideas and suggestions on how to make the workplace safe, put in place social distancing policies, many other things, which we actually have a big checklist for you on. But I think the bigger issue is that of positive psychology. And so what I'm going to share in this video is an interview I had this week with Marty Seligman. Marty is the father of positive psychology, a very well-known psychologist. And we had a good hour conversation about all the issues that affect work, going back to work, positive attitude at work, leadership out of the crisis. And all of that will be available in the Josh Burson Academy, but I'm giving you a 10-minute excerpt here. And the reason this is so important is something actually pretty profound. We're coming out of the beginning of the pandemic, but the level of uncertainty is massive. We don't really know how the virus behaves. We don't really know what creates immunity. We don't really know who has it until they exhibit symptoms. We don't know when it will rise up in any particular location. And we also know that it changes. It actually turns into other types of viruses. And this week we had a study from one of the epidemiologists in a large institution saying that it could go on for 2 years, and he expects there to be at least 3 waves of the virus. So given that amount of uncertainty, we have to go into this knowing that everything we do every day will have to evolve, and we're going to have to continuously monitor and adjust all of the practices we do, because there's an enormous amount of risk if this goes poorly, not only risk to individuals and ourselves as human beings, but to our companies, because we could get sued or be liable for all sorts of terrible things. So that leads to the issue of how do we create a positive sense of hope in ourselves, in our leaders, and in the workforce, but not unrealistic. And we had a very interesting conversation with Marty about this. And you'll see he shares some research from the work he's done in the Army on PTSD, and there's a lot to learn. So I'm not going to try to tell you everything before you hear from him. So anyway, I hope you enjoy listening to Marty, and read the article I'm putting out this week. It's all about uncertainty and how we manage growth and stability in a very uncertain and unpredictable time. Thank you. You may or may not be aware of this, but there's a huge conversation going on in every HR department of every company I've been talking to about resilience, work-life balance, stress, isolation, loneliness, and anxiety in the workforce, because roughly 70% of the American people that are still working are working from home. They have their children at home. Their children are out of school. Their companies are expecting them to do their jobs while they work at home, while they take care of their children. And we have I can send you some survey data, but it's sort of astounding that what they're saying is, I don't know how to keep up. I don't know where to spend my time. And one of the surveys that came out from MetLife, they surveyed, 2,000 people. And the number one response was, I'm tired. Wow. Tired of working all the time. I'm tired of not being able to have the food I want. All of these things that have happened to our lives that we've been trying to adjust, but now it's been 6, 7, 8 weeks. What I've been sort of positioning as the two sides of resilience: the individual side, which is all the human issues, and then the organizational side, which is all the things the company does to make it hard for you to even do your job and show up on time and kind of get on with your life. So anyway, I just wanted to get your perspectives on all this and maybe share with me what you think is current and interesting, and what we can leverage from your experience on this topic, because it's a massive conversation right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm in mind of two different aspects of positive psychology and their relationship to how to get through the pandemic on the one hand, and then who recovers and who rebuilds and who's resilient after it passes. So the first question that's been on my mind is, if we're isolated here, we're not getting the food we want, and we're tired, what does positive psychology tell us about a situation like that, particularly one in which we're threatened with infection?
Yeah.
And then the second question, which I want to address, is this will pass. And when it passes, the question is how to select and train the people who will rebuild and who will be the most resilient. And that depends on a different aspect of positivity. So let me do the first one, Josh, and tell you my best guess. Yeah. I'll call it puppies. And here's the literature from which it comes. So Sheldon Cohn, about 15 years ago, was interested in who gets a cold when you put rhinoviruses in their nose. And so basically he took a couple hundred people, he paid them a lot then, $300 a person, and he isolated them and put rhinoviruses in their nose. Speaking of, this is the puppy solution, Josh.
I'm talking about puppies.
Yeah. Hey, Mandy.
Hi, we have a puppy.
Adorable.
This is Josh Burson.
Hi.
Who's an entrepreneur who has an overview of what HR needs these days during the pandemic. So we're talking about
puppies.
Well, I just titled this puppies, in fact.
Yeah. We got her for all the joy that she's bringing at this difficult moment.
That's right. Pre-oxytocin.
There you go. There you go. All right, I'll take our puppies out. Come on, puppies. Come on, puppies.
Well, that prop is relevant here. So Josh, Sheldon kind of thoroughly measured people on both positive and negative personality and state variables before putting the rhinovirus in their nose. And he asked the question, who got a cold? Who got a bad cold? How long did it last? And could you predict it from psychological variables? And importantly here, he doesn't measure people's complaining. You know, I've got a bad cold. He weighs the mucus. So this is pretty well done stuff. And the results surprised me, since I had been working on optimism up until the time that I read Sheldon's stuff. And I would have bet that it was the optimistic people who wouldn't get a cold or would get a less severe cold. And that is not what he found. Basically, he found that people who were high on positive affect, smiley, fun, merriment, I'm going to call them puppy people for now, were less likely to get a cold. The cold was shorter and the cold was less severe. Interestingly, two variables did not predict anything at all. One was optimism. That predicted nothing about infection. And the second was the amount of negative emotion you had. That didn't predict anything either. What the big predictor was good cheer, merry, fun.
Yeah.
If we had to guess for now, the advice to give these 70% of the population that's isolating, and many of them are feeling tired and down, the best advice, I think, is to have fun. Let's figure out the things that are difficult in this situation that give people joy, good cheer, smiling. Some of my students are putting together compilations of fun YouTubes, fun music, and the like. We bought a puppy, and I'm spending a lot of my time listening to music I love. So I'm basically trying to instead of inundating myself with bad news all the time, I'm trying to maximize bombarding myself with what good news there is around. And I'm trying to be involved in social relationships, and I play serious bridge, which gives me a lot of joy on the internet. So part one is, if I had to guess now what we should be advising people to best survive this pandemic, is we want to think of ways of increasing positive emotion. Okay. But more important to me than surviving this, Josh, is who's going to rebuild it, and what kind of leadership do we need to rebuild it, and what kind of training and what kind of selection among our people do we have that predicts resilience. And the answer to that is pretty clear to me. So let me tell you the biggest, most recent study we did on this.
Okay.
Okay, so we had the entire Army database for everyone who was deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. So I'm one of the custodians of this database. And the question that we wanted to know, and what the Department of Defense wanted to know, was could you predict who was going to come down with PTSD? This is the opposite of resilience. Who's going to lapse? And so we had the entire database, and we did. The Army's very good at testing. So before being deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan, they took a series of tests. The main one of which I was in on devising, called the GAT, the Global Assessment Tool. And it has on it 6 questions. Well, there are about 100 questions, but 6 questions were the ones that were the predictors. And I'm going to call this the catastrophization or pessimism scale. They're very related. They're questions like, when a bad event occurs to you, will it unravel and produce a catastrophe? Where some people say not at all, and other people say it will. And there's pretty good psychometrics on this. But the way to code this is the catastrophic people were people who believe that when bad events occur, they were permanent, they were unchangeable, and they're going to ruin their lives. Whereas the non-catastrophic people believe the bad events will pass, they're temporary, they're local, it's just Iraq, and there's something they can do about it. They can plan and cope with these things. So of the 77,000 soldiers, we found that about 3,500 were diagnosed after they came back or during with PTSD. And we asked the question, could we predict it? And the answer was yes. There were 2 variables, both of which are relevant to the pandemic, that predicted it. One was the severity of combat. So if you were in very severe combat, that was a robust predictor of PTSD. To bring that variable up to date, measuring how disastrous the pandemic has been for a person would be roughly the equivalent of severity of combat. We did it on a 1 to 4 scale. And the second variable was catastrophization. So pessimistic catastrophizers were much more likely to come down with PTSD than the opposite, optimistic non-catastrophizers. And the size of this was pretty big. So if you were both in severe combat and you were in the bottom quartile, I think it's quartile of catastrophization, you were 4 times as likely to get PTSD as people in the opposite. So I think this is relevant to the recovery part of this. As we come out of this, it would be the people who were optimistic non-catastrophizers and who faced, I want to say, minimal disruption during the pandemic.
Well, as you can see, Professor Seligman has some amazing things to share with us. And we're going to be doing a series of webcasts on the topic of resilience and positive psychology with BetterUp, starting in the next few weeks. And some of these materials will be available inside of the Josh Bersin Academy as well. So I hope this was helpful and gives you a whole new way of thinking about the crisis. Maybe it is time to get a puppy if that appeals to you. And try to put a big dose of optimism into everything you do. We don't know where this is going to go day by day, but if we have a positive outlook, as Marty explains, we have the best possible chance of recovering as fast as we possibly can. Thank you very much for listening.